A simple woman accidentally sends a love letter to the wrong address, and a lonely CEO replies. Rain drummed against the windows of Marissa's small apartment in downtown Asheville, creating a symphony that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. Her fingers hovered over the crisp paper before her, adorned with the soft glow of her vintage desk lamp. At 30, Marissa Renee Coleman had written countless letters to an unnamed recipient, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she would finally send one. The clock on her wall ticked past midnight as she adjusted her position in the weathered armchair, her favorite spot for writing. Her curly dark brown hair fell in loose spirals around her face, still damp from her evening shower. She caught her reflection in the rain-streaked window, warm brown skin illuminated by the soft lamplight, full lips pressed together in concentration, and eyes that held both determination and uncertainty. "Dear Unknown," she began writing, her handwriting flowing across the page like water. "I don't know who you are, or if you'll ever read these words. Maybe that's what gives me the courage to write them." A sudden gust of wind rattled her window, making her jump. Marissa touched the delicate silver pendant at her neck, a habit she'd developed whenever her anxiety threatened to surface. The pendant had been her grandmother's last gift before passing away, a constant reminder that strength often came wrapped in delicate packages. She glanced at the stack of bills on her coffee table, partially hidden under a worn copy of her favorite novel. 2 jobs, waiting tables at the corner cafe during the day and freelance editing at night, barely kept her afloat. But they allowed her to support her mother's medical expenses while clinging to her dreams of becoming a published author. "Sometimes," she continued writing, "I wonder if dreams are meant to stay just that, dreams, the kind you hold close on rainy nights like this one, when the world feels both impossibly vast and suffocatingly small. I work 2 jobs, and some days, the only thing keeping me going is the thought that somewhere out there someone might understand this feeling." Marissa paused, biting her lower lip as she considered her next words. The habit, one she'd never managed to break, surfaced whenever she felt vulnerable. Outside, lightning illuminated the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, their silhouette a reminder of the vastness beyond her small corner of the world. Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something life-changing, but you can't quite take that first step, like you're caught between who you are and who you could be? I carry these questions with me every day, along with the weight of responsibilities and the lightness of hope. She shifted in her chair, reaching for the cup of chamomile tea that had long since gone cold. Her boho-style dress, a thrift store find she'd lovingly altered, rustled with the movement. The colorful bangles on her wrist clinked softly, each one a small celebration of life's tiny joys, even on the hardest days. Today, I watched an elderly couple at the cafe where I work. They weren't doing anything extraordinary, just sharing a piece of apple pie, their hands occasionally brushing across the table. But the way they looked at each other, it was like they were still discovering new things to love about one another, even after all these years. It made me wonder, is that kind of love still possible in our fast-paced world? Does someone out there still believe in connections that run deeper than casual swipes and hollow messages? Thunder rolled overhead as Marissa poured more of herself onto the page. Her words flowed freely now, carrying with them the dreams and fears she rarely voiced aloud. "I have this recurring dream where I'm standing on the old bridge near Riverside Drive. The sun is setting, painting the sky in impossible shades of gold and purple. In the dream, someone stands at the other end of the bridge. I never see their face, but I feel this overwhelming sense of coming home. Isn't it strange how we can miss someone we've never met?" She paused again, running her fingers over the turquoise stone ring on her right hand, another thrift store treasure that seemed to call to her creative spirit. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, like nature itself was listening to her confession. "Maybe I'm just a hopeless romantic, still believing in the power of handwritten letters in a digital age. But there's something about putting pen to paper that feels more honest, more real. Each stroke carries intention. Each word weighs more when you can't simply delete it with a keystroke." Marissa stood, stretching her legs as she walked to the window. The streetlights below created halos in the mist, and a few late-night wanderers hurried past with umbrellas tilted against the wind. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching her breath create a small fog circle. "I spend my days serving coffee to strangers, editing other people's stories, and trying to keep my own dreams from slipping away. My mother tells me I work too hard, but she doesn't understand that work is sometimes the only thing that keeps the anxiety at bay. When you're responsible for someone else's well-being, you don't have the luxury of falling apart. Returning to her desk, Marissa picked up her pen for the final paragraph. Her heart raced slightly, knowing that tonight these words would actually reach out into the world instead of joining the stack of unsent letters in her drawer. So here I am, writing to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Maybe you're also awake at this hour, carrying your own weight of dreams and responsibilities. Maybe you understand what it's like to feel both strong and fragile, brave and terrified all at once. Or maybe this letter will simply float away into the universe, joining all the other unspoken words and unfulfilled wishes. She signed the letter with a simple M and added a postscript. If by some miracle this reaches someone who understands, you can find me through P.O. Box 1224, Asheville, NC. The address she'd chosen randomly from the phone book trembled slightly in her unsteady hand as she wrote it on the envelope. Different from her usual P.O. box, this one felt like a fresh start, a new possibility. Standing at her apartment door, letter in hand, Marissa caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her oversized vintage cardigan hung comfortably over her dress, her large hoop earrings catching the light. The woman staring back at her looked both vulnerable and determined, scared and hopeful. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, touching her grandmother's pendant one last time for courage. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, the rain having finally ceased. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of jazz from the local bar and the occasional car splashing through puddles. Her boots clicked against the wet pavement as she made her way to the corner mailbox. For a moment, Marissa held the letter against her heart, closing her eyes and making a silent wish. Then, before doubt could take root, she slipped the envelope through the slot. The soft thud it made, as it joined other letters, seemed to echo with possibility. What she couldn't know as she hurried back home through the misty night was that her letter, through a twist of fate and a postal worker's tired eyes, would soon find its way into hands she never imagined. Hands that belonged to someone who, like her, was awake at that very moment, wrestling with his own demons and dreams in the quiet hours of the night. As Marissa climbed the stairs back to her apartment, the old wood creaking beneath her feet, she felt something shift in the universe. Whether it was hope or fear or something in between, she couldn't tell, but something had changed the moment she let those words fly free into the world. Inside her apartment, she curled up in her armchair once more, wrapped in the comfort of her grandmother's old quilt. The rain had started again, softer now, like a lullaby. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of that mysterious figure from her dreams, standing at the other end of the bridge, waiting. Michael Joseph Prescott stood in the darkness of his workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of sawdust and varnish. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep had become an elusive companion since his father's passing 3 months ago. His calloused hands moved mechanically over a piece of oak, sanding in smooth, steady strokes that matched the rhythm of his breathing. At 36, he cut an impressive figure, 6'2" of quiet strength, his dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame his face. His blue-gray eyes, inherited from his mother, reflected the dim workshop lights as he worked. The sleeve of his worn flannel shirt was rolled up, revealing forearms marked with the honest wear of his trade. The grandfather clock in the corner, one of his father's last projects, chimed 3 times, its sound echoing through the empty space. Michael paused, running a hand through his beard, a habit that had intensified since taking over Prescott Construction. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, along with the crushing debt his father had left behind. "Just keep moving," he muttered to himself, words that had become his mantra. The unfinished blueprints on his desk caught his eye. Not construction plans, but his own designs, dreams of architectural artistry that he'd had to set aside. In another life, he might have pursued that passion, might have created buildings that were more than just structures. But reality had other plans. Hours later, as morning light began to filter through the workshop's dusty windows, Michael finally headed home. His truck rumbled through the quiet streets of Asheville, past the sleeping storefronts and early morning joggers. The mountain air was crisp with the lingering touch of dawn, and fog hung low over the valley, shrouding the Blue Ridge Mountains in mystery. His house, a modest craftsman-style home he'd inherited along with the business, stood silent and empty. The porch steps creaked under his weight, a sound that used to signal his father's return home. Now it just echoed his solitude. Michael collected his mail mechanically, a habit more than a conscious act. Bills, advertisements, and a letter that seemed out of place. The envelope was simple, but the handwriting caught his attention, flowing and elegant, unlike the stark typeface of utility notices. Inside, he dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and shrugged off his leather jacket. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting the thin layer of dust on surfaces he rarely bothered to clean anymore. His coffee maker gurgled to life, the only morning companion he'd allowed himself since Andrea left 2 years ago. The letter sat on his counter, demanding attention. It wasn't addressed to him, not really. P.O. Box 1224 was printed on the envelope, but somehow it had ended up in his mailbox. He should return it, mark it wrong address, and let it find its intended recipient. Instead, he found himself opening it. The first words caught him off guard. Dear Unknown. Something in those simple words reached past his carefully constructed walls. He told himself he'd stop reading, that this wasn't meant for him, but his eyes kept moving across the page. Each paragraph felt like a confession, raw and honest in a way he'd forgotten people could be. The writer's words about dreams and responsibilities, about feeling both strong and fragile, they resonated with something deep inside him, something he'd buried beneath layers of practicality and obligation. Michael sank into his father's old armchair, the leather worn smooth from years of use. The letter trembled slightly in his hands as he read about the elderly couple sharing apple pie, about dreams of meetings on bridges at sunset. The writer's vulnerability was both frightening and fascinating. His coffee grew cold, forgotten as he read the letter again, and then a third time. The signature, just an M, seemed to pulse with possibility. He found himself wondering about the person behind these words, someone who still believed in the power of handwritten letters, someone who understood the weight of dreams deferred. Standing abruptly, Michael moved to his study, a room he rarely entered anymore. Dust covered the drafting table where he used to sketch his architectural dreams, but in the drawer he knew there was paper, proper writing paper his mother had given him years ago, insisting that some things deserved more than typed words or hasty emails. He sat, pen hovering over the blank page. The last time he'd written a letter was to Andrea, trying to explain why their marriage had fallen apart. But this felt different. This unnamed correspondent had offered their truth to the universe, and something in him needed to respond. Dear M, he began, then stopped. What could he say to this stranger? How could he explain that their words had reached across the void and touched something he thought had died with his father? The pen moved almost of its own accord. I wasn't meant to receive your letter, but maybe, in a world that often feels too calculated and cold, some accidents are meant to happen. Your words about standing on the edge of something life-changing resonated with me. I've been standing on my own edge for so long I've forgotten how to move forward or back. You wrote about dreams and reality, about the weight of responsibilities. I understand that weight. Every morning I walk into a workshop that still echoes with my father's voice, trying to keep alive a legacy that sometimes feels like it's crushing me. Some days, the only thing that keeps me going is the thought that he believed I could do this, even if I'm not sure I believe it myself. That elderly couple you described, they reminded me of my parents. My father used to look at my mother that way, like she was a mystery he was still trying to solve after 30 years together. I used to think I'd find that kind of love. Now, most days I'm too busy trying to keep his business afloat to think about what I might be missing. You asked if that kind of love is still possible in our fast-paced world. I don't know. But your letter made me remember what it was like to believe in possibilities. Michael paused, running his hand through his beard again. The morning had grown older, sunlight now streaming fully through the windows. In the distance, he could hear the town coming to life, cars on the street, the faint sound of construction from a nearby site. I have dreams too, he continued writing. They're gathered dust in this study, sketched on papers I haven't looked at in months. Buildings that could be more than just structures, designs that could touch something in people's souls, but dreams don't pay bills or honor promises made to dying fathers. Your words about feeling both strong and fragile. I understand that too. Every day I put on the mask of the capable business owner, the reliable contractor, the son who won't let his father's legacy die. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I stand in my workshop and wonder if I'm just playing a part in someone else's story. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Maybe because you're a stranger who will never read these words. Maybe because your honesty deserves honesty in return. Or maybe because sometimes we need to speak our truth to the universe, even if no one is listening. He signed the letter simply, J. After sealing the envelope, Michael held it for a long moment. The rational part of his mind told him this was foolish. He didn't even know if the P.O. box belonged to the letter writer, but something stronger than reason made him reach for his keys. The morning air had warmed as he walked to the post office, letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket. People passed him on the street, morning commuters, teenagers heading to school, tourists already exploring the town. None of them knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Michael Joseph Prescott, taking a step away from the edge of safety. At the post office, he hesitated one final time before sliding the letter into the mail slot. The soft sound it made falling into the box seemed to echo with finality, or perhaps it was possibility. Walking back to his truck, Michael felt different, not lighter exactly, but more aware. Aware of the morning sun on his face, of the mountain air filling his lungs, of the possibility that somewhere in this town, someone might understand. The lunch rush at Corner Cafe had finally subsided, leaving Marissa with a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, absently adjusting her colorful head wrap, a splash of yellows and oranges that brightened the otherwise mundane Tuesday afternoon. Her feet ached in her comfortable but well-worn boots, a reminder of the 6 hours she'd spent moving between tables with practiced grace. "Marissa, honey, you've got that look again," Ruby, the 60-something cafe owner, called from behind the coffee machine. "Like you're writing stories in your head instead of focusing on refills." Marissa smiled, grateful for Ruby's motherly concern. "Just thinking about my mum's doctor's appointment tomorrow," she lied. The truth was, she'd been thinking about the letter she'd sent 5 days ago. Each morning she'd checked her P.O. box, trying to convince herself she wasn't really expecting a response. "Go on and take your break," Ruby insisted, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight. "I can handle things for 30 minutes. Outside, the April air was warm with hints of approaching summer. Marissa's favorite bench in Pack Square Park welcomed her like an old friend. She unwrapped her sandwich, saved from the morning's prep work, and pulled out her worn notebook, its pages filled with story fragments and random thoughts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget to pick up my prescription after work." Marissa touched her grandmother's pendant, a gesture that always centered her. Her mother's multiple sclerosis had been stable lately, but the medication costs were a constant worry. After finishing half her sandwich, she decided to check the P.O. box before returning to work. It was a detour she'd been making twice daily, each time telling herself it would be the last. The post office was quiet, the afternoon lull setting in. Her key turned in box 1224 and her heart stopped. There was a letter. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The handwriting was strong but elegant, nothing like what she'd imagined, though truthfully she hadn't allowed herself to imagine anything at all. Finding a secluded corner of the park, Marissa sat beneath an old oak tree. The envelope opened easily under her fingers, and as she unfolded the letter, her breath caught at the first words, "Dear M." Someone had answered. Someone had read her words, felt them, and reached back across the void. Each paragraph made her heart beat faster. This stranger, this J, understood. They knew about the weight of responsibilities, about dreams gathering dust, about the mask worn for others' benefit. Their words about their father's workshop and architectural dreams painted pictures in her mind so vivid she could almost smell the sawdust. "Marissa, your break ended 15 minutes ago." She jumped at Ruby's voice, nearly dropping the letter. Ruby stood a few feet away, concern evident in her lined face. "I'm so sorry," Marissa stammered, quickly folding the letter and tucking it into her apron pocket. "I lost track of time." Ruby's expression softened. "Must be some letter to make you forget about work. I haven't seen you this flustered since that publishing house requested your manuscript last year." Marissa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's nothing. Just..." But how could she explain this connection to words written by a stranger? This feeling that somehow in this vast world, someone understood her heart's whispers. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee orders and casual conversations with regulars. The letter seemed to burn in her pocket, demanding attention. Every free moment, her mind wandered to those words about elderly couples and dusty dreams. Finally, after her shift ended and she'd picked up her mother's prescription, Marisa found herself in her apartment. The setting sun painted her walls in shades of amber, and she could hear the distant sound of street musicians in the tourist district. She changed into her favorite comfort clothes, soft leggings and an oversized vintage sweater that slipped off one shoulder. Her curls, freed from their wrap, fell around her face as she settled into her writing chair. Fresh paper waited on her desk, but the words wouldn't come easily this time. How did you respond to someone who had seen into your soul through a misdirected letter? After 3 false starts, she began, "Dear Jay, your letter found me today, and with it, a reminder that sometimes the universe has plans we can't understand. You weren't meant to receive my words, yet somehow they found the exact person who would understand them. You wrote about standing on edges, about the weight of legacies and promises. I want to tell you something. Your father's workshop may echo with his voice, but I believe it's also waiting to hear yours. Dreams that gather dust don't die. They wait. They wait for the moment when we're ready to brush them off and hold them to the light again. Today at the cafe where I work, I watched a young man spending his lunch break sketching buildings on napkins. He reminded me of you, of the architect you described in your letter. He had that same look I imagine you must have when you think about your designs, like he was seeing something more than what was in front of him, something beautiful trying to break free into the world. You asked why you were telling me all those things. I think sometimes we need to speak our truth to a stranger because they have no expectations, no history of who we're supposed to be. They can see us purely through our words, our hopes, our fears. I understand about masks. Every morning I put on mine, the capable daughter, the reliable waitress, the aspiring writer who hasn't given up. But your letter made me wonder, what if our masks aren't hiding us, but protecting something precious until it's strong enough to face the world? The elderly couple I wrote about came back to the cafe today. He had a handkerchief ready when she sneezed, and she automatically picked the tomatoes off his sandwich because she remembered he doesn't like them. It was such a small thing, but it made me think about what you said about your parents, about love that keeps discovering new mysteries. Maybe that kind of love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. Maybe it's built in these tiny observations, these small acts of knowing someone so well that caring for them becomes as natural as breathing. You signed your letter, J, and now I find myself looking at every customer whose name might begin with that letter, wondering if you're the one who wrote these words that have touched me so deeply, but perhaps it's better not knowing. Perhaps there's magic in this connection that exists purely in ink and paper, in thoughts and dreams shared across the darkness. I have so many questions I want to ask you about your architectural dreams. What kind of buildings do you imagine? What stories do you want them to tell? About your workshop, does the sawdust really smell like possibilities? About your heart, does it feel lighter, having shared its burden with a stranger? But maybe questions aren't what we need right now. Maybe what we need is just this. 2 souls recognizing each other's struggles, reaching out across the void to say, I understand, you're not alone. Still, if you want to write back, know that your words have found a safe harbor here. Know that someone reads them, feels them, holds them carefully like the precious things they are. With hope, M. Marisa read over her words once, twice, then quickly sealed the envelope before doubt could creep in. This time her walk to the mailbox felt different, not desperate or anxious, but purposeful, as if she were taking part in something larger than herself, a conversation that somehow felt both deeply personal and universally significant. The letter slipped from her fingers into the box, and Marisa stood for a moment in the gentle evening air. Around her, Asheville was coming alive with its nighttime energy, music spilling from bars, locals and tourists mingling on the sidewalks, the mountains standing silent guard over it all. She touched her grandmother's pendant one last time before turning toward home. Tomorrow she would help her mother with her therapy exercises, serve coffee to strangers, and edit someone else's stories. But tonight, she had done something brave. Tonight she had reached back across the darkness and said, "I hear you, I see you, you're not alone." And somewhere in this city, she hoped, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart would receive her words and know they were true. The bank statement lay open on Michael's desk like an accusation. The numbers hadn't improved since last month, and the weight of Prescott Construction's debt seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. He ran his hands through his loose hair, which had fallen from its usual bun during hours of poring over accounts. "Mr. Prescott?" His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "The client from the Highland Grove project is here for the meeting." Michael straightened, quickly securing his hair back and adjusting his collar. "Send them in, Nancy." He stood, his impressive height emphasized by the morning light streaming through the office windows. The meeting went as expected, another wealthy client wanting luxury features on a budget timeline. As he walked them through material options and construction schedules, Michael felt the familiar disconnect between what he was doing and what he'd once dreamed of creating. "We'll need the blueprints by next week," the client said, shaking his hand. "My wife insists on everything being exactly like the houses in those magazines she reads." After they left, Michael escaped to the workshop behind the office. The space had always been his sanctuary, but lately it felt more like a refuge. The scent of fresh cedar from his latest project filled the air as he ran his hands over the smooth wood. "You should have seen this coming, son," he could almost hear his father saying. "Construction isn't about art. It's about giving people what they want." The afternoon mail delivery provided a welcome interruption. Among the usual business correspondence, he spotted it, an envelope with now familiar handwriting. His heart rate quickened as he closed the workshop door, ensuring privacy. The letter was longer this time, and Michael found himself sinking onto his workbench, completely absorbed in Em's words. Her description of the young man sketching buildings on napkins hit particularly close to home. He glanced at his own napkin sketches, hastily hidden beneath construction orders. When his phone rang, he almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Liam Kennedy, his father's oldest friend and the bank manager handling their loans. "Michael," Liam's voice was grave, "we need to talk about the payment schedule. I know we're behind, Liam, but it's not just that. Your father's last project, that custom house on Riverside, the new owners are claiming there are structural issues." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That house had been his father's final achievement, completed just weeks before his death. "That's impossible. Dad supervised every detail. They're bringing in inspectors next week. Michael, if they find anything serious..." The implications hung heavy in the air. A lawsuit could destroy everything his father had built. After hanging up, Michael stared at Em's letter, still open on his workbench. Her words about masks and protecting something precious until it's strong enough struck him differently now. Was he protecting his father's legacy, or hiding behind it? He pulled out his drafting paper, the expensive kind he saved for special projects. His hand moved almost of its own accord. "Dear Em, your letter found me on a day when I needed reminding that there's more to life than balance sheets and client demands. You asked about my architectural dreams. What kind of buildings, I imagine. The truth is, I dream of spaces that tell stories. Not the cookie-cutter luxury homes my clients want, but places that grow from the land itself, that carry meaning in every beam and archway. When I was younger, I used to climb the mountains around Asheville, finding spots where the view took my breath away. I'd sit there for hours sketching buildings that seemed to grow from the rock itself, structures that honored both the landscape and the people who would live in them. My father called them impractical. Maybe he was right. You wrote about the young man sketching buildings on napkins, and I smiled because my desk drawers are full of such sketches. Dreams scribbled in margins, between material orders and cost estimates. Sometimes I wonder if that's all there'll ever be. Margins in someone else's story. Today I received news that could change everything. A house my father built, his last project before he died, might have problems. Serious ones. The kind that could bring down not just a building but an entire legacy. I should be focused on finding solutions, calling lawyers, preparing for the worst. Instead, I'm sitting in my workshop, writing to a stranger about dreams and napkin sketches. But maybe that's exactly what I need to be doing. You wrote about masks protecting something precious until it's strong enough to face the world. I've been wearing my father's mask for so long, trying to be the son who could carry his legacy forward. What if that's not who I'm meant to be? The sawdust you asked about, yes, it smells like possibilities, but it also smells like history, like decades of my father and grandfather shaping wood into what other people wanted. I wonder sometimes what they would have built if they'd listened to their own dreams instead. There's this spot on the old bridge near Riverside Drive where I sometimes stop on my way home. The view of the mountains at sunset makes me think of those sketches from my younger days. Sometimes I imagine building something there, not on the bridge itself, but inspired by that view. A structure that would make people stop and look up, remember that there's beauty in the world beyond their daily struggles. You asked if my heart feels lighter, having shared its burden with a stranger. The truth is, it feels both lighter and heavier. Lighter because your words give me permission to acknowledge these dreams I've kept hidden. Heavier because now I have to decide what to do with them. The elderly couple you described, with their handkerchiefs and removed tomatoes, they remind me that love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about small choices, made day after day. Maybe that's true for dreams too. Maybe they're built not in giant leaps, but in tiny decisions to stay true to ourselves. I find myself wondering about you too. What stories are you writing when you're not serving coffee? What dreams are you protecting behind your own mask? Does your heart race a little when you see an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting, the way mine did today? There's something freeing about writing to someone who doesn't know my name, who can't see the expectations I carry. With you, I'm not Michael Prescott, struggling to save his father's company. I'm just Jay, a man who dreams of building beautiful things. If you're still willing to be part of this conversation, know that your letters have become a bright spot in days that often feel overwhelming. Know that somewhere in this city, a man with sawdust on his clothes and too many responsibilities on his shoulders stops what he's doing every time he sees your handwriting. Until next time, Jay. Michael read over the letter once more before sealing it. Outside his workshop, he could hear Nancy locking up the office for the day. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Instead of heading straight to the post office, he drove to the bridge near Riverside Drive. Standing there, watching the last light fade from the sky, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would face whatever challenges came with the house inspection. But tonight, he would send these words out into the world, a small act of faith in something larger than himself. The letter slipped from his fingers into the mailbox, carrying with it both confession and hope. As he walked back to his truck, Michael realized he felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more authentic. As if by sharing his truth with Em, he was finally beginning to share it with himself. "Ms. Coleman," the nurse's voice pulled Marissa from her thoughts. "Your mother's ready to go home now." Marissa stood from the uncomfortable hospital chair, adjusting her flowing maxi dress and gathering her mother's belongings. The emergency room visit hadn't been planned. Her mother's sudden dizzy spell during physical therapy had sent them rushing here instead of going to their regular appointment. "Baby, you don't have to look so worried," her mother Diane said as Marissa helped her into the wheelchair. "The doctor said it was just a reaction to the new medication." Marissa tried to smile, but her mind was already calculating the cost of this unexpected visit. Even with insurance, the co-pays were adding up. The letter she'd received from Jay yesterday remained unread in her bag, a luxury she hadn't had time to indulge in. Outside, the afternoon heat wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Marissa carefully helped her mother into their old Honda, making sure she was comfortable before loading the wheelchair into the trunk. "You missed work again because of me," Diane said softly as they drove home. "Ruby's going to get tired of making exceptions." "Ruby understands," Marissa assured her, though she knew her mother was right. 3 missed shifts this month alone. Besides, I got some editing done while we were waiting. What she didn't mention was the half-finished letter to Jay crumpled in her bag, started during those long hours in the emergency room. How could she explain to her mother that writing to a stranger had become as essential as breathing? At home, after settling her mother in for a nap, Marissa finally allowed herself a moment of peace. She sat at her small desk by the window, the afternoon light filtering through her sheer curtains. Her fingers traced the edges of Jay's unopened letter as she took in the sight of his now familiar handwriting. As she read, her world shifted. His words about the troubled house project, about dreams sketched in margins, about standing on that bridge. They painted pictures in her mind so vivid she could almost see him there. When she reached the part about his father's legacy, tears pricked at her eyes. She understood all too well the weight of expectations, the fear of letting down those we love. Taking out fresh paper, she began to write, "Dear Jay, I'm writing this letter in the quiet aftermath of a day that reminded me how quickly our carefully planned lives can unravel. My mother had a health scare today, nothing severe, thank goodness, but enough to remind me of life's fragility. As I sat in the emergency room, watching her sleep in that narrow hospital bed, I thought about what you wrote regarding masks and legacies. You asked about my stories, about the dreams I protect behind my own mask. The truth is, I've been working on a novel for the past 2 years, stealing moments between coffee orders and hospital visits. It's about a daughter watching her strong, vibrant mother slowly fade away and learning that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help. Art imitating life, I suppose, though I never intended it that way. Your words about the house your father built struck a chord with me. We all inherit legacies, don't we? Some are made of bricks and mortar, others of expectations and unspoken promises. My mother was a dancer before MS took that away from her. Sometimes I catch her watching old videos of her performances, and I see in her eyes the same look you described, dreams confined to margins, waiting to break free. You mentioned that spot on the bridge near Riverside Drive. I know it well. On days when the weight of responsibility feels too heavy, I often walk there during my lunch break. The view of the mountains reminds me that some things endure, no matter what changes life brings. I wonder if we've ever stood there at the same time, two strangers sharing the same moment of peace without knowing it. The news about your father's last project must be terrifying. I can't offer solutions, but I can tell you this. A legacy isn't just what we inherit. It's what we choose to do with that inheritance. Maybe the real test isn't whether you can preserve everything exactly as it was, but whether you can honor its essence while making it your own. You asked about my heart racing when I see your handwriting. Yes, it does. Your letters have become anchors in weeks that often feel like they're spinning out of control. They remind me that somewhere in this city, someone else understands what it's like to live in the space between duty and dreams. There's something I haven't told you, something I've barely admitted to myself. I received an email last week from a small publishing house interested in my manuscript. They want to meet, to discuss possibilities. It's the kind of opportunity I've dreamed of, but the timing couldn't be worse. With my mother's health issues and mounting medical bills, I can't afford to reduce my work hours to focus on writing. Dreams, it seems, don't always arrive when we're ready for them. But your letter about your architectural sketches made me think. You described buildings that grow from the land itself, that carry meaning in every beam. Maybe stories are like that too. Maybe they grow from the soil of our experiences, taking shape whether we're ready or not. The question is, do we have the courage to let them stand? I find myself imagining the buildings you would design if you were free to follow your vision. Would they have spaces for dreamers to gather? Quiet corners where people could write letters to strangers? Windows perfectly placed to catch the sunset over the mountains? The coffee shop where I work is housed in an old building with exposed brick walls and wooden beams that have witnessed decades of stories. Sometimes during quiet moments, I rest my hand against those beams and imagine all the dreams they've sheltered. Is that what you see when you look at buildings? The stories they could tell? You said you're not just Michael Prescott, struggling to save his father's company, but Jay, a man who dreams of building beautiful things. Well, I'm not just a waitress with too many responsibilities. I'm M, a woman who believes that sometimes the most beautiful stories are written in the spaces between what we must do and what we dream of doing. If your heart is heavy with the weight of that house inspection, know that someone is thinking of you, hoping that whatever happens you'll find a way to build something true to both your father's legacy and your own dreams. With understanding, Emmy. Marissa folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper. Through her window she could hear the distant sound of her mother's television, the familiar theme song of her favorite show, Reality Calling. She slipped the letter into her bag. Tomorrow morning, before her shift at the cafe, she would mail it. For now, she had medications to organize, dinner to prepare, and a manuscript to edit. Standing at her desk, Marissa caught her reflection in the window. The setting sun painted her dark skin in warm gold tones, her curls loose around her face. She touched her grandmother's pendant, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Keep going, she whispered to herself, the words both a prayer and a promise. Somewhere in this city, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart was doing the same thing, finding the courage to take one more step forward, to build something beautiful from the materials life had given him. And maybe that was enough for now. Two souls reaching across the darkness, reminding each other that even the heaviest dreams could take flight if someone believed in them. The inspectors moved through the riverside house like silent judges, their tablets and measuring tools extending like extra limbs. Michael stood in what had been meant to be the grand foyer, his father's pride evident in every careful detail, the hand-carved banister, the precise angle of the morning light through the custom windows. "Mr. Prescott?" The lead inspector's voice echoed in the empty space. "We'd like you to take a look at something." Following them to the basement, Michael's boots echoed on the concrete floor. His hair was pulled back tight today, his usual worn flannel replaced with a crisp button-down. Professional, controlled, the mask of a capable business owner. Here, the inspector's flashlight beam illuminated a crack in the foundation wall. "And there are similar patterns in the east wing." Michael's stomach tightened. He'd helped pour this foundation himself, remembered his father obsessing over every detail. "How bad?" "We'll need to run more tests, but..." The inspector's hesitation said everything. Back in his truck, Michael sat with the engine off, staring at the house through the windshield. His phone buzzed with messages from Liam at the bank, from the homeowner's lawyer, from contractors waiting for payment on other projects. Instead of answering any of them, he pulled out the letter he'd received that morning. Em's words about legacies and inheritance seemed prophetic now. Her own struggles with her mother's illness and her writing dreams resonated with a new intensity. The drive to his workshop took longer than usual, traffic clogged with tourists enjoying the spring weather. Inside, the familiar scent of wood and varnish usually brought comfort. Today, it felt like his father's ghost watching, waiting to see how his son would handle this crisis. He pulled out his drafting table, the one item he'd insisted on keeping when they'd modernized the office. Fresh paper waited like a blank canvas. "Dear Em, I'm writing this letter from my workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of unfinished projects and the weight of decisions I'm not sure how to make. Today, inspectors confirmed what I feared about my father's last house. The foundation, the very thing that's supposed to hold everything together, is compromised. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, isn't there, about foundations and the things we build our lives upon. You wrote about your mother's dancing, about legacies of expectations and unspoken promises. As I watched those inspectors move through my father's final project today, I couldn't help but think about the foundations we inherit and the cracks we sometimes find in them. Your words about the publishing house opportunity struck me deeply. Isn't it strange how dreams often arrive at the most impossible moments? When I was reading your letter, I remembered something my father once told me. He said, "Son, timing is everything in construction. Pour concrete too early or too late and the whole thing falls apart." I think he meant it as practical advice, but maybe there was more to it. You asked about the buildings I would design if I were free to follow my vision. Today, standing in that compromised house, I found myself sketching in the margins of the inspection report, not fixes for the existing problems, but something entirely new. A house that works with the land instead of fighting it, that acknowledges its own imperfections and makes them part of its beauty. I've been staring at a stack of bills and legal notices for hours, trying to figure out how to save my father's company. But your letter made me ask myself, what if I'm trying to save the wrong thing? What if the real legacy isn't the company name or the contracts, but the love of creation he taught me? The understanding that everything we build, whether it's a house or a life, starts with a single honest line on a blank page. The timing of your manuscript opportunity isn't wrong, Em. Maybe it's exactly right. Maybe these moments when everything seems impossible are exactly when we need to reach for our dreams the hardest. After all, isn't that what you're doing every day, balancing your mother's care with your writing, your work with your art? You mentioned resting your hand against the old beams in the coffee shop, imagining the dreams they've sheltered. I did something similar today. In the basement of that troubled house, I pressed my palm against the cracked foundation. I wanted to understand what went wrong, but also to feel what might still be right. The bones of the house are still strong, even if the skin is damaged. Maybe that's true for dreams too. They endure, even when the structures we build around them start to fail. You asked if I see the stories buildings could tell. The truth is, I see too many stories sometimes. In every beam and board, every nail and joint, I see choices made, compromises accepted or rejected. Today's inspection report tells a story of hurried decisions and hidden weaknesses, but it also tells a story of ambition, of reaching for something beautiful even if the reach exceeded the grasp. I haven't told anyone else this, but I've started sketching again. Real sketches, not just margin doodles. Late at night, after poring over legal documents and bank statements, I find myself drawing the buildings I see in my dreams. They're different from anything my father would have built. Organic shapes that flow into their surroundings, spaces that feel both sheltered and free. I don't know if they'll ever be more than drawings, but making them helps me breathe. Your story about your mother watching her old dance videos haunts me. I have videos too. My father teaching me how to read blueprints, how to feel the grain of wood, how to see the potential in raw materials. Sometimes I watch them late at night, searching for answers in his confident movements and clear instructions. But maybe the answers aren't in the past. Maybe they're in what we choose to do with our inheritance, as you so wisely suggested. The house inspection isn't finished. There will be more tests, more reports, more decisions to make. The weight of it all feels crushing sometimes. But your letters, they're like windows in a dark room, letting in light and air when I need it most. They remind me that somewhere in this city, someone else is standing in their own workshop of sorts, balancing dreams and duties, finding beauty in the struggle. You signed your last letter with understanding. I want you to know that understanding goes both ways. Your courage in pursuing your writing while caring for your mother, in believing in stories even when reality demands attention, it inspires me to be braver with my own choices. Until next time, JPS. Yes, if I could build anything I wanted, it would definitely have quiet corners for writing letters to strangers, and windows perfectly aligned with the sunset. Some dreams are too beautiful not to share. Michael sealed the letter, his hands slightly dusty from the workshop. Outside, the day was fading, the mountains turning purple against the darkening sky. He thought about Em, imagining her at her desk, perhaps writing her novel or caring for her mother, finding strength in the spaces between obligations. The drive to the post office was automatic now, a journey his heart knew better than his mind. As he slipped the letter into the mailbox, he felt something shift inside him. The foundation might be cracked, but maybe that's what let the light in. Marissa's reflection stared back at her from the publishing house's glass doors. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a flowing rust-colored dress that complemented her skin tone, paired with her grandmother's pendant and simple gold hoops. Her natural curls were styled in a neat updo, professional but true to herself. "You've got this," she whispered, touching the letter from Jay tucked into her portfolio like a talisman. His words about timing and seizing impossible moments had given her the courage to schedule this meeting, to dare to take this step. Inside, Asheville Literary Press occupied a converted Victorian house, its rooms transformed into cozy offices filled with manuscripts and coffee-stained mugs. The receptionist led her to a sunlit conference room where 3 editors waited. Ms. Coleman, the senior editor Lynette Barnes, extended her hand. "We're excited to discuss your manuscript, Dancing in the Dark." Marissa sat, placing her portfolio on the polished table. "Thank you for considering it. Your story about a daughter caring for her mother, a former dancer, it's powerful stuff," Lynette began. "Raw, honest, beautifully observed. We think it has real potential." Marissa's heart soared, but years of cautious hope had taught her to wait for the other shoe to drop. "However," another editor chimed in, "we'd need you to commit to a fairly intense revision schedule. The market for contemporary fiction is competitive. Timing is crucial." There it was. Marissa thought of her mother's medications lined up on the kitchen counter, of Ruby covering her shifts at the cafe, of bills piling up like autumn leaves. How intense are we talking about? 3 months for the first major revision. You'd need to cut back on other commitments. This needs to be your priority. Marissa's fingers found Jay's letter through the portfolio's leather. She thought of his words about foundations and cracks letting in light. "Could I have a day to consider the timeline?" she asked, surprising herself with her steady voice. Back on the street, spring sunshine warmed her face as she walked to her favorite thinking spot, the bridge near Riverside Drive, the same bridge where Jay went to contemplate his own crossroads. Hidden in a quiet corner, she pulled out paper and pen. "Dear Jay, I'm writing this letter from our bridge. Yes, I've started thinking of it as ours, this place where both of us come to face our turning points. I just left a meeting that could change everything, and I find myself understanding your words about foundations and timing in an entirely new way. The publishing house wants my book, the story about mothers and daughters, about dance and loss and love. They want to help me tell it. But they're asking for something that feels impossible. Time. Time I don't have, stretched as I am between my mother's care and paying our bills. Your letter about the cracked foundation arrived just when I needed it most. You wrote about the inspection, about finding problems in what should be solid ground. As I sat in that conference room listening to their offer, I thought about what you said, that maybe the cracks are where the light gets in. This morning, before the meeting, my mother had a good day. She was doing her physical therapy exercises, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the dancer she used to be. The grace was still there, hidden beneath the limitations of her body. She saw me watching and said something I can't stop thinking about. "Sometimes, baby, the most beautiful dance is the one that works with your constraints instead of fighting them." Farkani, maybe that's what you were trying to say about your architectural dreams, about buildings that work with the land instead of against it. I wonder if that's what we're both learning, in our different ways. How to create beauty, not despite our limitations, but through them. You asked about my courage in pursuing writing while caring for my mother. The truth is, I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But your letters, they're like handholds in a climbing wall, giving me something solid to grip when everything else feels uncertain. The publishers gave me a day to decide. One day to choose between safety and risk, between what is and what could be. I keep thinking about what you said regarding your father's videos, about searching for answers in the past. My mother's dance videos are like that too. But today, watching her find new ways to move, I realized something. Maybe the answer isn't in how she used to dance, but in how she chooses to move now. You wrote about sketching again, about organic shapes that flow into their surroundings. My novel needs that kind of reimagining too. The publishers suggested changes that scared me at first, diving deeper into the hard truths, the messy emotions. But sitting here on our bridge, watching the sun play on the water below, I'm beginning to see how right you were about making our inheritance our own. Here's something I haven't told anyone else. I've started writing a new story, different from anything I've done before. It's about two people who never meet but find each other through letters, about dreams shared in ink and paper, about the courage to build something new from the materials life gives us. I wonder if you'd recognize yourself in those pages. The wind is picking up, carrying the scent of spring rain. Soon I'll have to leave this spot, head to the cafe for my afternoon shift, then home to help Mom with her evening routine. But before I go, I want to tell you something. Your words about seeing too many stories in buildings, how every beam and board holds choices made and rejected, they've been echoing in my mind. Because that's exactly how it feels to write, to care for someone you love, to dare to dream bigger than your circumstances. Every word, every choice, every moment of care is another piece of the foundation we're building. The cracks in your father's house may seem like failure, but what if they're really opportunity? An invitation to build something new, something that honors the past while embracing the future. You said my timing isn't wrong. Maybe yours isn't either. I think I know what I'm going to tell the publishers tomorrow. It won't be easy, juggling everything, but then again, when has anything worth building ever been easy? Maybe the real test isn't whether we can avoid the cracks in our foundations, but whether we can find the courage to build something beautiful anyway. Keep sketching your dreams, Jay. Keep seeing the stories in every beam and board. And know that somewhere in this city, someone is writing her own story, finding strength in your words, believing in the possibility of beauty even in the midst of chaos. With hope and courage, MPS. Those quiet corners you'd include in your buildings, the ones meant for writing letters to strangers? I'd like to think they'd have windows facing our bridge, where dreamers could watch the sun set and believe just for a moment that anything is possible. The letter complete, Marissa stood and stretched, her dress catching the late afternoon breeze. Below, the river flowed steadily, constant despite the changes on its banks. Like her mother's love, like Jay's understanding, like the stories that insisted on being told. She had just enough time to mail the letter before her shift at the cafe. As she walked to the post office, her steps felt lighter, more purposeful. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, the publisher's deadline, her mother's needs, bills to be paid. But for now she had this, words sent out into the world like prayers, and the knowledge that somewhere in this city, a man with sawdust on his clothes and dreams in his heart would understand. The final inspection report lay open on Michael's desk, its conclusions devastating in their clarity. Multiple structural issues, design flaws, rushed decisions. His father's last project wasn't just imperfect, it was unsafe. "We've received 3 more cancellations," Nancy said softly, placing another stack of papers on his desk. "The news about the Riverside house is spreading." Michael nodded, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the mountain view outside his office window. His hair was loose today, falling past his shoulders in dark waves. He hadn't had the energy to tie it back. M's latest letter sat in his jacket pocket, read so many times the creases were starting to wear. Liam from the bank was due in an hour to discuss their options, though options felt like too generous a word for what amounted to different ways of losing everything. But M's words about working with constraints instead of fighting them kept echoing in his mind. Standing at his drafting table, Michael began to sketch, not repairs or modifications, but something entirely new. His hand moved with certainty, creating lines that flowed with the land's natural contours. When Liam arrived, instead of the financial reports he was expecting, Michael showed him these drawings. "I don't understand," Liam said, studying the sketches. "What am I looking at?" "A new direction," Michael replied, pulling out fresh paper to write one more letter before making his final decision. "Dear M, I'm writing this from my office, surrounded by the remnants of my father's dream and the beginnings of something new. Your letter about your mother finding new ways to dance, about working with constraints instead of against them, it arrived exactly when I needed to hear it. The final inspection report came in today. The news is worse than we feared. My father's last house, the one he poured his heart into, has fundamental flaws that can't be patched or hidden. The company is bleeding clients, and the bank is running out of patience. But here's the strange thing. For the first time since this crisis began, I feel truly clear about what needs to be done. Your words about making our inheritance our own have been ringing in my head like a bell. This morning, before dawn, I went back to that house. Not to inspect or assess, but to listen. I stood in the quiet rooms and asked myself what my father had really wanted to build. Not just houses, but homes. Places where people could build their lives, create their stories. The methods might have been flawed, but the dream itself was beautiful. You wrote about your mother saying that the most beautiful dance is the one that works with your constraints. Looking at these rooms, I finally understood what that means. The house's problems can't be fixed by following the old blueprints, but maybe they're not meant to be. I've spent the last 12 hours sketching a completely new design, not a patch job or a compromise, but a total reimagining. A house that works with the hillside instead of fighting it, that turns structural necessities into artistic elements. The cracks in the foundation, they'll become channels for natural lighting, a feature instead of a flaw. The problematic east wing, transformed into a series of terraced gardens that stabilize the soil naturally. It's nothing like what my father would have built, but maybe that's the point. You wrote about finding strength in limitations, about building something beautiful anyway. That's what I'm proposing to do, not just with this house, but with the entire company. I'm meeting with the bank and the homeowners today to present my plan. Not to save Prescott Construction as it was, but to transform it into something new. A company that specializes in adaptive design, in turning problems into possibilities. It's risky. We'll lose clients who want traditional luxury homes, and the transformation will take everything we have. But I keep thinking about your decision with the publishers, how you're finding ways to pursue your dreams while honoring your responsibilities. You're right, nothing worth building is ever easy. You mentioned writing a new story about 2 people connecting through letters. I smiled when I read that, wondering if you know how much your letters have already changed me. They've been like windows in a house I didn't even realize was dark, letting in light and air and possibility. I spent some time on our bridge last night, watching the sunset paint the mountains. A young couple walked past, discussing their dream home. They were talking about solar panels and garden spaces, about rooms that would grow with their family. It struck me that maybe the market isn't just ready for change, it's hungry for it. My father used to say that a house is only as good as its foundation. I always thought he meant the physical foundation, the concrete and steel, but sitting here, surrounded by new designs and possibilities, I wonder if he meant something else. Maybe the true foundation is the courage to build something authentic, something that reflects who we really are. You asked me once what kind of buildings I would design if I were free to follow my vision. I'm about to find out. In a few hours, I'll either have burned my last bridge or built a new one. Either way, I'll know I tried to create something true. The sun is rising over the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of promise. Soon I'll put on my best shirt, tie back my hair and walk into a meeting that will change everything. But before I do, I wanted to share this moment with you, to tell you that your courage in pursuing your writing, in caring for your mother, in daring to build something new, it's helped me find my own. Whether this works or fails spectacularly, I know now that I can't keep building other people's dreams while neglecting my own. Just like you can't keep your stories locked inside while helping others tell theirs. So here's to new foundations, Em, to working with our constraints, to finding beauty in the reconstruction, to believing that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tear down what isn't working and build something true in its place. With gratitude and hope, JPS. In my new design for the Riverside house, there's a reading nook in the East Wing. It has a window seat overlooking the mountains, perfectly positioned to catch the sunset. I sketched it thinking of you, imagining someone sitting there, writing letters that change lives. Michael sealed the letter, then gathered his designs for the meeting. The morning sun streamed through his office windows, catching the silver threads in his dark hair. In his pocket, M's letter rustled like a promise. Walking to the post office, he passed the corner cafe, wondering if M might be inside, serving coffee and dreaming up stories. The thought made him smile. They were both about to take enormous risks, both about to reshape their inherited dreams into something new. The letter slipped from his fingers into the mailbox. In a few hours he would either save his father's company by transforming it entirely, or lose it trying to build something authentic. Either way, he was finally building his own dream. The hospital corridor seemed endless, its fluorescent lights harsh against Marissa's tired eyes. Her laptop lay open on her knees, the cursor blinking accusingly on a half-finished chapter. The publishing deadline loomed just 2 weeks away, but right now words felt impossible. Her mother's latest MS episode had been severe, a fall that led to complications. 3 days in the ICU had left them both shaken. Marissa's curls were pulled back in a messy bun, her usual vibrant style replaced by comfort clothes that had seen too many hospital chairs. "Miss Coleman," Dr. Richards approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Your mother's stable now, but we need to discuss long-term care options." Long-term care. The words hit like physical blows. Options they couldn't afford, changes they weren't ready for. Marissa nodded mechanically, clutching her grandmother's pendant. In her bag, Jay's latest letter waited, still unopened. She'd received it just before the ambulance came, and somehow reading it had felt like tempting fate. Now, in this quiet moment while her mother slept, she finally broke the seal. His words about transformation, about building something new from the ruins of the old, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. While she'd been pulling hospital night shifts, he'd been revolutionizing his entire company. His courage felt like a lifeline. Finding paper in her bag, she began to write, "Dear Jay, I'm writing this from a hospital room watching my mother sleep. The steady beep of monitors marks time like a metronome, keeping rhythm for a dance we never chose to perform. Your letter about transformation and new foundations found me at a moment when everything familiar seems to be shifting beneath my feet. 3 days ago, my mother fell. The MS, which we've managed to keep at bay for so long, suddenly showed its teeth. I've spent 72 hours in this chair, watching doctors and nurses come and go, trying to write between blood pressure checks and medication adjustments, and wondering if this is the moment when everything changes. You wrote about your decision to transform your father's company, to turn problems into possibilities. God, I wish I had your courage right now. The doctors are talking about long-term care facilities, about professional help we can't afford. My publisher's deadline feels like a distant dream, Impossible to reach from this sterile room with its antiseptic air and fluorescent glare. But then I look at my mother. Even now, sedated and weak, her hands move sometimes in her sleep, dancer's hands, still remembering steps and rhythms. I think about what you said regarding the cracks in the foundation letting in light. Maybe this is our crack, our moment of forced transformation. This morning, in the quiet hours before dawn, I opened my laptop and started writing something new. Not my contracted novel about mothers and daughters, but a raw, honest account of this night, of watching someone you love dance with shadows. The words came like a fever, like a confession, like something that needed to be born. I remember you standing in your father's troubled house, listening to what it needed to become. I've been doing the same thing here, listening to the rhythm of my mother's breathing, to the story that's trying to tell itself through us. Maybe, like your redesigned house with its light channels and terraced gardens, our life needs to be reimagined rather than simply repaired. The publisher called yesterday. I told them about the hospital, about needing more time. Instead of the rejection I expected, they asked to see what I've been writing here. Sometimes, my editor said, life gives us a different story than the one we planned to tell. You took an enormous risk with your company, choosing authenticity over tradition. I keep thinking about that as I sit here, watching the sun rise over the hospital parking lot. The novel I promised them was safe, a carefully crafted story about loss and love. But this new thing I'm writing, it's dangerous. It's real. It's full of fear and hope and midnight prayers whispered under fluorescent lights. Remember how I told you about writing a story about two people connecting through letters? Sitting here, reading about your courage in transforming your company, I finally understand what that story wants to be. It's not just about connection, it's about transformation, about how sometimes we need someone else's faith to help us find our own. The doctors say Mom will need intensive therapy, more care than I can provide alone. My first instinct was to drop everything, the book, the publishing contract, all of it, to be the daughter I think I should be. But then I remembered what you wrote about honoring legacies by making them our own. Last night, Mom woke briefly. She looked at my laptop, at the scattered papers around my hospital chair, and said something that broke my heart wide open. I didn't stop dancing so you could stop writing. So here I am, writing to you from this crossroads. My mother needs more care than I can give. My publisher needs a different book than the one I promised. My heart needs, well, that's another story entirely. But for the first time, I'm considering that maybe these aren't obstacles to overcome. Maybe, like your redesigned house, they're opportunities to build something unexpected. I'm going to show the publisher my hospital writings. I'm going to look into part-time care options that will let Mom keep her independence while giving me space to write. I'm going to stop trying to dance steps I've outgrown and start choreographing new ones. Your courage in reimagining your company, in honoring your father's dream by transforming it, it gives me hope. Hope that there's beauty in reconstruction, in working with our constraints, in building something true from the materials life gives us. The sun is rising over the mountains now. From Mom's hospital window, I can just see our bridge in the distance. I imagine you there, presenting your new designs, daring to build something authentic. It makes me brave enough to try the same, with faith in new foundations. MPS. That reading nook you designed, the one with the sunset view, I can see it so clearly. Maybe one day I'll sit there and write a story about how letters can build bridges between hearts, about how sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest cracks. Marissa folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the paper. Outside, the morning shift was arriving, bringing fresh energy to the quiet halls. Her mother stirred, her dancer's hands moving to music only she could hear. Standing, Marissa stretched her stiff muscles. She had just enough time to mail the letter before the morning rounds began. As she walked through the hospital corridors, her steps fell into a new rhythm, not a surrender, but a transformation. Like Jay with his redesigned house, she was learning to build beauty from what life had given her. The letter slipped from her fingers into the mailbox outside the hospital. Above, the morning sun painted the mountains in shades of possibility. Somewhere in this city, a man with dreams in his heart and sawdust on his clothes was daring to build something new. She could do no less. The autumn breeze carried the scent of change as Marissa stood on their bridge, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. 6 months had passed since her first letter had found its way to Jay. 6 months of dreams shared, courage borrowed, and hearts opened through ink and paper. Her latest book advance check sat in her bag, proof that sometimes taking risks paid off. Dancing Through Shadows, her raw account of those hospital nights with her mother, had resonated with publishers in a way her original manuscript never had. But more importantly, the advance had helped secure a comfortable assisted living apartment where her mother could have both independence and care. The light was fading, casting long shadows across the weathered boards of the bridge. Marisa smoothed her dress, a flowing creation in deep burgundy that made her dark skin glow in the evening light. Her curls danced free in the breeze, and her grandmother's pendant caught the last rays of sun. She pulled out Jay's final letter, received that morning. "Dear Em, meet me on our bridge at sunset. It's time we gave our story more than margins to grow in. Jay." Simple words that made her heart race. After months of sharing their deepest fears and highest hopes through letters, they were finally ready to step out of the shadows of anonymity. The sound of footsteps made her turn. A tall figure approached from the other end of the bridge, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, catching the golden light. Even at a distance, she could see the sawdust on his worn jeans, the quiet strength in his stance. Michael saw her at the same moment, the woman whose words had given him the courage to transform his father's company into something new. Prescott Adaptive Design was now known for turning architectural challenges into innovative solutions. Her letters had been his foundation when everything else was crumbling. They moved toward each other slowly, both aware of the weight of this moment. When they met in the middle of the bridge, the last sunlight illuminated them both, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Em," he said softly, his blue-gray eyes taking in her face for the first time. "Jay," she replied, a smile playing at her lips. Without words, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a rolled paper. She recognized the type, architectural drawing paper, the expensive kind he'd mentioned in his letters. As he carefully unrolled it, she saw it was a design, not just any design, but one she knew intimately. "The reading nook," she breathed, recognizing the window seat positioned perfectly to catch the sunset, the built-in bookshelves, the organic flow of the space that seemed to embrace both its inhabitants and the view beyond. "It's been approved," he said, his voice warm with emotion. "The whole redesign. The owners loved how it turned their structural problems into features. This nook, I designed it thinking of you, of your words about finding beauty in broken places." Marisa touched the drawing gently, seeing in its lines all the hopes they'd shared through their letters. "Your vision is beautiful," she said, "just like your letters made me believe it would be." "Your novel," he began, then paused, running a hand through his beard, a gesture she'd read about so many times. "I got an advance copy from your publisher. I hope you don't mind. I felt like I'd lived those nights in the hospital with you, through your letters. Reading the book was like watching our correspondence bloom into something bigger than both of us." She stepped closer, drawn by the understanding in his eyes. "You helped me write it, you know. Your courage in transforming your company, in building something true, it gave me the strength to tell the real story, not just the safe one." The last light was fading now, the mountains turning to silhouettes against the darkening sky. In the distance, lights were beginning to twinkle in the city below. "When my father's house started showing cracks," Michael said softly, "I thought it was the end of everything. I never imagined those cracks would lead me to you." Marisa touched her grandmother's pendant, a gesture he recognized from her letters. "Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest cracks," she quoted his own words back to him. He smiled, reaching out to touch the pendant gently. "Your grandmother's?" "My foundation," she nodded. "Like your father's workshop." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the reality of their presence sink in. All those words shared, all those dreams exchanged, had led to this moment. "There's something else I want to show you," Michael said, pulling out another set of drawings. "I've been working on a design for a new community arts center. The plans include a dance studio with special flooring for people with mobility issues. I thought, maybe your mother might want to consult on it." Tears pricked at Marisa's eyes as she looked at the plans. The space was beautiful, full of light and possibility, designed to make art accessible to everyone. She'd love that, she whispered. She's been teaching seated dance classes at the assisted living facility. This could give her purpose again. And there's a writer's studio too, he added softly, with a view of the mountains and yes, plenty of quiet corners for writing letters to strangers. Marisa laughed, the sound carrying across the water below. I don't think we're strangers anymore, Jay. No, he agreed, his hand finding hers. We're something much better. We're builders. The touch of their hands felt like coming home, like foundations settling into place, like dreams taking solid form. Above them, the first stars were appearing, witnesses to this moment when letters became life. What happens now? Marisa asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. Now, Michael said, his fingers intertwining with hers, we build something beautiful together, something true, something that works with our constraints instead of fighting them, she added, remembering her mother's words about dance. Exactly. He turned to face her fully, his free hand gently touching her cheek. Ready to start? Instead of answering, Marisa rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft and sure, like ink flowing across paper, like dreams taking flight. When they parted, both were smiling. The bridge had grown dark around them, but neither moved to leave. They stood together, hands clasped, hearts aligned, watching the city lights below. Two souls who had found each other through words, now ready to write their next chapter together. In his pocket, Michael had one more letter, plans for a home he'd designed, one that combined his vision with the warmth he'd felt in Marisa's words. But that could wait. For now, this moment was enough. Standing on their bridge, between letters and dreams, ready to build whatever came next, together. 1 year later, the light streamed through the window seat of the newly completed riverside house, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Marisa sat in her favorite spot, notebook open on her lap, watching the construction of the community arts center in the distance. Her second novel was coming along well, inspired by the stories of transformation she witnessed every day. Still writing letters to strangers? Michael's voice carried from the doorway, warm with affection. He was dressed for work, his dark hair tied back neatly, though a bit of sawdust already clung to his shirt. Always, she smiled, making room for him on the window seat. Though these days they're more likely to be thank you notes from Mom's dance students. The Arts Center had become something neither of them had expected. Diane Coleman's adaptive dance classes were now full every session, attracting people from all over Asheville. Watching her mother teach from her wheelchair, helping others find new ways to move, had inspired Marisa's latest story about reinvention and resilience. Speaking of letters, Michael said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It bore the Prescott Adaptive Design logo, now known throughout the region for innovative, accessible architecture. The Winston-Salem project came through. They want us to design a whole complex of adaptive living spaces. Marisa touched her grandmother's pendant, no longer a nervous habit, but a gesture of gratitude. Your father would be proud, you know. Not just of the company's success, but of how you've made it your own. Michael settled beside her, his arm naturally finding its way around her shoulders. Through the window, they could see the mountains that had witnessed their story unfold. The old bridge where they'd first met was visible in the distance, still catching the morning light. Ruby asked about the cafe renovation today, Marisa mentioned, leaning into him. The Corner Cafe was their latest joint project, a redesign that would make the space more accessible while preserving its historic charm. Did you tell her about the hidden letterboxes we're building into the new booths? Not yet. I thought we'd surprise her. Marisa smiled, thinking of the small, beautifully crafted spaces designed to hold dreams and possibilities, waiting to be discovered by future writers and dreamers. The morning sun painted their world in shades of promise. On Marisa's desk lay the early sketches for their own home, a collaboration that merged Michael's architectural vision with her storyteller's heart. Each room was designed to hold both memories and possibilities, a perfect blend of what was and what could be. Ready to build something new? Michael asked, echoing the words from that first night on the bridge. Marisa closed her notebook, tucking her pen away. Some stories didn't need to be written down to be true. With you? Always. They left the reading nook together, stepping out into a day full of possibilities. Behind them, the window seat waited patiently for the next dreamer, the next letter writer, the next story waiting to be told. Some said their own story was like a fairy tale, The misdirected letter, the anonymous correspondence, the sunset meeting on the bridge. But Marissa and Michael knew better. Their story wasn't about fate or fairy tales. It was about courage. The courage to see beauty in broken things, to build something true from what life gives you, to believe that sometimes the most precious dreams are the ones we dare to build together. And somewhere in Asheville, in a quiet corner of a newly renovated house, a letterbox waited for the next dreamer to find it, ready to hold new stories of transformation and hope. Because some traditions, like writing letters to strangers and believing in possibilities, were worth keeping alive. After all, you never knew when a single letter might build a bridge between two hearts. The end. Imagine you received an unexpected letter from a stranger, and that letter completely changed the course of your life, just as it did for Marissa and Michael. What long-held dream would you finally have the courage to pursue? What story would you like to tell that stranger who would somehow understand your heart perfectly? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.